Peak oil is the concept that oil is a limited and finite resource, and when its production history is modeled, it will follow a certain profile. The concept of peak can be useful when we talk about any limited resource. This diagram is known as the Hubbard curve, developed in 1956 by geologist Marion King Hubbard. Hubbard noticed that the production profile of a single oil well followed a bell curve, and he attempted to apply this model to the oil industry as a whole. Hubbard's work influenced many environmental thinkers, including David Holmgren, the co-founder of the permaculture movement, Richard Heinberg, author of Peak Everything and co-founder of the Post-Carbon Institute, and Rob Hopkins and Naresh Giangrande, the co-founders of the International Transition Towns movement. In recent years, discussion of peak oil has waned, in part because of fracking practices, but also because of James Hansen's announcements about greenhouse gas accumulations, which made the climate a far more urgent issue. But we're going to look at peak oil in terms of what the concept can teach us about any finite resource. The Hubbard curve is an effort to draw a visual picture of oil production over time. It starts out with the early discoveries. Think about back when they just drill a hole in the ground and oil would spurt out. Back then, production wasn't very much. But as humanity invented more ways to use oil and discovered more oil deposits, the curve accelerated. People who studied peak oil theory point out that there's a certain psychology to it as well. As humanity experiences that tremendous ascent, there's a perception that everything is fantastic, unlimited. We will invent more and more ways to use this wonderful resource, and this will never end. For just about any substance in today's marketplace, there are primary uses, and then there are secondary uses that were developed to use byproduct, the parts that would have been waste product. In the case of oil, we tend to think of oil for its primary uses, such as gasoline, airline fuel, etc. However, the byproduct of making those pure products out of crude oil gave rise to things like asphalt, a wide assortment of plastics, and many other products that we use every day. However, oil is a finite resource. Sure, the earth makes more of it, but it makes more very, very, very slowly, particularly when compared to how quickly humanity is using it. So for purposes of human timescales, we must consider oil to be a finite resource. At peak, physical reality kicks in. We move into the declining second half of the planetary supply. The easy-to-get-to stuff has already been used up. All that's left is the hard-to-get-to stuff. For example, deep water oil, Arctic oil, layered deposits that require fracking, far more expensive and highly destructive to extract. People who've studied peak oil theory point out that as peak approaches, we see wild price fluctuations and competition over what's left. The abundant supply, which once was possible, now becomes more constrained. And meanwhile, we have a whole society that's built around this precious substance. We've built businesses, entire industries, economic structures, all constructed upon the presumption that it will forever be cheap, plentiful, and unlimited. Now, one thing about a Hubbard curve is you're only able to accurately identify true peak in retrospect, after it has already occurred. So people debate, did we hit peak in 2008, 2010, or will it be 2026? But focusing on exactly when is peak misses the point. The point is, this resource is not unlimited. It never was. We all made a mistake to think of it like that. At some point, the party ends, things get tougher, things get less possible. Hopefully, we figure out what's going on before it gets downright nasty. Post-peak realities mean the supply chain for the key substance and all its derivatives gets disrupted. While we aren't going to run out of and have zero oil tomorrow, the cost of getting oil, and certainly at the volume we've become accustomed to, is getting prohibitive. Post-peak times can mean uncertainties in physical product and supply chains, upheaval in economics and cost expectations, and sometimes upheaval in governments and international relations. No matter how you look at it, once we cross into the declining second half, it means disruption. It's important to view peak oil in perspective. When we look at peak oil within the scale of written history, we realize that cheap, plentiful oil has only been available to humanity for a very brief time period. All of us who are alive today, including my 96-year-old father, have only known life within the oil age. So we slide into thinking that this is the way things have always been, the way things will always be. We need to remember, people lived happy, healthy, productive, connected lives before the brief era of oil, and people will lead happy, healthy, productive, connected lives after the time of oil. It's up to us to design it that way. So the concept of peak oil says that oil is not an unlimited resource, and the abundance party's pretty much over. At some point fairly soon, humanity is going to have to quit depending on oil. We can't keep going as an oil-dependent society. Like it or not, we're going to have to move away from oil. And climate change says we've got to make that move as soon as possible. What's more, oil is not the only substance for which we're at peak. Richard Heinberg popularized the term peak everything. It goes by other names, such as biocapacity.